Hi, my name is April, and this is High Fantasy Writing. As a new writer, or perhaps a writer who's been at it a while but is looking for more ways to hone their craft, drafting is often what's mostly talked about in writing advice circles. There's advice on whether you should plot your story out or whether you should just pants the whole thing. There's discussion on whether or not you should write every single day in order to get it done, or if it's okay to take your time. There's advice on fast drafting and ways to either up your word count or cut your word count down. What I want to talk about today is whether or not, as you are drafting the first rough draft of your story, whether or not you should go back in your story to edit some things that maybe you have realized as you're developing your story, some things at the beginning need to be changed. Now, as with every single bit of my writing advice, always, this is absolutely up to the individual. Everybody has a different method of writing stories. Everybody has different mental states when they write. Everybody has different capabilities with attention and motivation. So all of these things have to be taken into account when you're deciding whether or not going back to edit while you're drafting will work for you, or if you will just dig yourself into a hole of never being able to finish your draft because you're always trying to perfect what has come before rather than writing your ending. Now, some issues that can come up when you go back to edit your draft as you're still writing it is that you can get bogged down into more detail than is strictly necessary for a first draft. You might spend so much time working out the intricate little details that definitely add flavor to your story, but don't really hold much weight when you're talking about the big overarching story structure, that you just get lost in these details and you never actually end up finishing the book because you feel like you've just got to get this perfectionist mindset and perfect that which you first wrote in order to have an ending that you're satisfied with. Now, for some people, this might be fine. You might not dive into this hole and not be able to dig yourself out. It actually might help you writing your ending to go back and sometimes edit a few little things that you feel like is really important to the narrative later on. Now, what you can do is write a couple of notes on things you need to change. However, if you're like me, that's not gonna cut it. The way my mind personally works is that I can get a flash of an idea and have all these puzzle pieces just fall into place perfectly and then forget it immediately. Like, I can be in the shower, have a perfect idea, and then once I get out of the shower, I have completely forgotten what I thought about. So for me, writing down notes can help initially, but if I write a couple of brief notes about the thing that I want to change and then don't actually flesh those out in the actual draft, and I actually just go back and for months finish the manuscript, when I go back months later and look at those notes, I'm not going to have a clue what I was talking about. I'm not going to be able to pick up the train of thought that I had months ago when I then start to make some edits to the beginning of my story that I needed to change some stuff on. Now, you also have to take into account how long it takes you to draft something. Some people can fast draft a book and have it done in a week. That's unrealistic for the vast majority of writers. Now, if you can finish a draft within a week, then it's more likely that you're not going to forget the different little notes that you had to change things at the beginning because it's in such a close time frame. But if you're like me and your story is over 200 1,000 words long, and it's taken you years to draft it out because writing isn't your main priority. You have high school, then you have college, and you have your jobs, and you have just other responsibilities where you might not be in the position to be able to spend hours and hours dedicated to drafting. It's not going to work out so great for you memory wise. A positive of editing as you draft is I personally get less attached to the story if I'm constantly rewriting, changing tone, choosing different sentence structures, choosing different point of views perhaps that the chapter is actually in. I get less married to the idea of my story that I've written a long time ago if I'm constantly changing it. If I have a chapter that I have written and then not touched for a long time, there's a bit of nostalgia that happens when I go back to edit that. And sometimes for me personally, it's actually more difficult for me to change stuff in it because I've known it as this thing for so long. Again, this is mostly a problem if you do take a long time to draft rather than just drafting it in a week or a month. But I think that it is an important thing to think about and where you are in your writing journey and how easy it is for you to change things that you have written previously. A downside of this is that you might not remember all of the changes that you've made if you're constantly changing the story previously. So if, say, you have one character who you decide, like in the very beginning, they're in a fight, and your initial draft, they didn't get injured at all. And then you get kind of halfway through the story, and then you think, actually, it might be really compelling to have them be injured in that fight to show that they have work to do in their fighting techniques. They need to learn more about fighting. And so I want to go back and change and have them be injured in that scene. Now, if you just go back to that scene and say have their leg be broken in the fight, then you don't go through the rest of the scenes after and write in their broken leg, that could cause an issue with continuity in your story. If you want them to have a broken leg and you write in that their leg is broken, and then you make sure you go through and change everything in the course of their leg healing and change all the narratives up until the point you're at or until the point it heals, or they mention that they had broken their leg, and then you get even later in your draft, and then you think, you know what, never mind, I want them to have broken an arm. And then you go back and you change everything to instead they broke their arm. And then you think, oh no, that makes it really difficult for the narrative if they've broken their arm. So let's go back and just say that they got a couple of cuts that they need to handle. Then you're changing so much of your story each time, and you might miss some spots where continuity would be a problem. So I think editing while you draft can be perfectly fine, but there are a couple of pitfalls that you need to be aware of to make sure you're not making your story more complicated than it needs to be. With something like I want them to have broken their leg in the fight rather than get out completely scot-free, then you can, I feel, for most people, it would be fine to just write a little note in each chapter after that. Hey, remember his leg is broken. Hey, remember his leg is broken. Hey, remember his leg is broken. That sort of thing, notes for me personally, could work. But if you have an emotional kind of puzzle piece that needs to be in place and an entire scene with many puzzle pieces coming together, that could be more complex with notes. So in that case, I would probably just rewrite the whole scene or edit the whole scene to make those puzzle pieces all fall into place. But if it's something simple like we just need to add injury to the person, throughout the chapters, then notes can be okay in that regard. Now, some people will swear by, don't you dare ever go back and edit while you're drafting. It will ruin your story. It will ruin your momentum for your story. It will make you a bad writer. You're never going to finish anything if you do that. And like I say with every single one of my writing advice things and how to tell if it's good writing advice, if it's a blanket statement with them saying this is the only way you can do something, they're wrong. They're just wrong. Don't feel bad if you're a person who does work better when you go back and edit while you're drafting, even if a lot of people, it's just popular advice and people just repeat it just because they heard somebody say it and they're like, yeah, I'm just gonna regurgitate that. Don't feel bad if you don't follow that advice. Don't feel bad if you do sometimes get stuck on earlier portions of your book and need to figure out that before you can finish the ending. Because crazy as it sounds, if you don't have a strong beginning, the rest of your story is probably going to be pretty messy. And it's a good thing to build a very strong foundation for your book. Because if your only goal is to get books out as fast as possible and you don't care about the quality of the book, you just get it out, get it done, get it out, get it done, get it out, get it done. And you just want to have that bragging right of saying, well, I have 34 books published in 2 years. Then it's like, okay, what? Your goals might be different from somebody else who wants to take their time drafting and editing their story. And that's perfectly fine if those are your goals. But that's not everyone's goal when they're writing. So should you go back and edit as you're drafting your first draft of your story? That is highly subjective, and you need to take a look at what works for you, the way your mind works as you're writing, and maybe test it out. Maybe go back and start editing. And if you find yourself falling into this pit of you just can't get out of editing and go back to drafting the completed story, then you can take a pause and say, okay, maybe editing while drafting doesn't work for me. But for a lot of us, it does work. We can go back and we can edit things and then pick right back up at the rest of the story and continue drafting and be perfectly fine with it. So that's my 2 cents on the pitfalls and positives of editing while you draft. Just take a look at what works for you and go with it. Don't be concerned if everybody says, well, that's a bad way to write. There is no bad way to write. Everybody has different goals when they're writing. Everybody has different mental states as they write. If you have something like ADHD, making an entire stream of conscious story in a linear fashion might absolutely not work for the way your brain works. But if that is the way your brain works, go for it. If it's not, don't go for it. It's so subjective. So these overarching, just blanket statements of never edit while you draft just aren't helpful in the slightest. So take a look at what your goals are for writing and see how that advice lines up. See if it will work for you personally rather than just taking writing as a one-size-fits-all advice system. I hope that was helpful for you. I hope that perhaps I alleviated some of your concerns if you're a new writer and you found yourself editing while drafting and then you were told that was wrong. I hope that this reassured you that you're not doing anything wrong. It's okay to do that, especially if it works for you. You're not a bad writer. My name is April. This is High Fantasy Writing. I do have a TikTok now at High Fantasy Writing, same as my handle here on YouTube. I will link it in the description. down below and go ahead and check that out if you want some more short form writing advice. And it's a lot of stuff, just kind of stream of consciousness, things that I'm noticing, things that I'm reading. You can follow along with me as I'm editing my story, which I'm hoping this is going to be the last developmental edit that I have to do. I'm looking at hopefully next year fully finishing this developmental edit and then really seriously querying or looking into self-publishing, getting beta readers, all that sort of thing. So if you want to follow that little journey of mine, go ahead and check me out on TikTok. Go ahead and give this video a like if you found it helpful in any way whatsoever. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you want to see more from me, have me pop up on your feed, and hit that bell if you want to be notified every time that I drop a video. And go ahead and in the comments, let me know whether you edit while you draft or whether that just absolutely doesn't work for you at all. I really enjoy hearing everybody's different styles of writing and what works for them versus what works for other people. I hope you have a great rest of your day and happy writing.